Hi, welcome back to Z-fari, the zombie novel. Today we're going to read chapter 17. It's a short one, but it advances the plot and it's got some interesting things in it, and I think you'll enjoy it. We'll find out, won't we? Yes, we will. Don't forget, you can buy a copy of this book to read on your own. That's what I'm talking about. Just think about it. Anyway, if you're ready, we'll begin. Here we go. Chapter 17. As the last rays of the setting sun struck the roof of the Donaldson mansion, Ike and Bebe drove into the compound. The two big goons carrying Heckler & Koch UMP-45s motioned for them to stop as soon as the rear bumper of the Lumina passed the wall. The fact that the barrels of the serious black submachine guns were pointed at their heads made the request even more urgent. Ike rolled down his window and the big goon on the left walked up. He said nothing. He simply waited for Ike to explain why he was here. Ike gave their names, and before he could say another word, the left goon pointed to a paved way that led around the right side of the big house. Since they had spent the night in the barracks before, Ike and Bebe knew the rest of the way. Ike parked the car, and he and Bebe walked into the barracks. While there was room for 20 men to sleep in the barracks, it was empty now. As Ike and Bebe walked from the entrance back to the bathroom showers, they noted that 7 beds, the ones closest to the bathroom, were claimed. There were duffel bags on 7 of the beds, claiming those places. Ike and Bebe walked back out to the Lumen and brought in their gear, a couple of soft-sided suitcases, their boots, and their weapons. Ike had brought his personal arms that he had used on the platform. Bebe had done the same except for the Barrett, which he had left at Ike's house. They lay on their beds and talked quietly, trying to make some sense out of the turmoil that had taken over their once well-ordered lives. About 9 p.m., 7 severe, obviously former soldiers, strode into the building. The 7 men proceeded smartly to their places, halted and stood in front of the beds, waiting for something. One, not the tallest, but certainly the most muscular, approached the beds where Ike and Bebe lay. Each felt a nagging compulsion to stand to meet this stranger, and they did. The man said one word, "Ruthert." Ike looked at Bebe. Bebe looked at Ike. The man said, "Hayes, Duvalier, my name is Ruthert." It's pronounced R-U-T-H-E-R-K. Do not mispronounce my name. You do not need to know my given name, and I do not care to know yours. We will never become that familiar. You're here because you possess information vital to the success of this ground search and rescue operation. If you did not, you would not be here. My team and I are the professionals. You two are the tits on the board. Don't get in the way. Ruthert turned and his 6 men stood, each next to his bed. He pointed at each man in turn and said his name by way of introduction. In, Dow, Tree, Pedwar, Pump. As each man's name was said, he stiffened and straightened. Ruthert turned back to Ike and Bebe. Breakfast is in the mansion at 7. We eat at the staff table in the kitchen. If you're late, you will not eat. Lunch is at noon. Dinner is at 6. We will be leaving for Peck on Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. tomorrow. We will get to know each other. I will learn if there's anything at all that you can contribute and the ways in which you will be a liability to this mission. Good night. Maintain your weapons. Read or talk quietly if you wish. If you are loud enough to disturb me, I will come to you and render you unconscious. Lights out is at 10. Ruthert turned smartly, almost marched back to his bed. When he got to it, he sat down on the bed, reached underneath and pulled out a truly evil-looking knife. Its blade was a Fairbairn Sykes, but its hilt was the brass knuckles of a trench knife. He spent the entire time left before lights went out, sharpening the knife and occasionally glaring at Ike and Bebe. When the lights winked out precisely at 10 o'clock, the room was filled with the sounds of men slipping under the covers. Bebe thought of whispering sweet dreams to Ike, but quickly thought the better of it. Bebe was nudged awake in the dark with a hand covering his mouth. It's 5 o'clock, a voice recognized as Ike said as the hand was pulled away. Ruthert and his G.I. Joes just left for 5 miles double time, but someone might be listening. I don't trust anyone in this shit pile, from the little curl on top all the way down to these bastards. Bebe threw off his blanket and sat up. He stood up and headed for the light of the bathroom. When he returned, Ike was standing next to his bed, dressed in light brown, camo cargo pants, a black t-shirt, and a steel-toed Doc Martens. He nodded to Bebe and proceeded to strap an evil-looking foot-long K-bar knife to his right calf. Bebe got dressed too, then. Somehow he didn't want to wear patrol uniform clothing for this job for Donaldson. Donaldson soiled everything he touched. He slipped on a pair of worn jeans, his old hunting boots, and a royal blue t-shirt with Zydeco all night long in bright white script emblazoned across his chest. That'll probably set the soldier boys off. Bebe smiled as he slid his papa's belt knife onto his belt and gave the Marlin and the Glock a quick inspection. He was ready for just about anything those fucks could dish out. Bebe hunted gators and zombies for a living. Bebe and Ike talked softly until about 6:45. "Time to go to breakfast," Bebe said. The two ex-troopers trooped over to the back of the mansion and found the kitchen. They had been seated at the table for 5 minutes when Rutherk and his gang marched in. Rutherk glared at Ike and Bebe for 15 seconds before giving his henchmen permission to sit. Donaldson's servants brought piles of food and served it as if it were dinner in the formal dining room. Bebe felt uncomfortable in this incongruous environment. This was just another aspect of this whole job that was just not right. When the eggs and pancakes and waffles and breads and pastries and cereal and oatmeal and porridge and bacon and sausages and ham and juices and milk and tea and coffee were finished, Rutherk led his flunkies out the door. Bebe looked at Ike. The two followed. Rutherk led them first to the rifle and pistol range. He glanced at Ike and Bebe's weaponry but said nothing. He ordered his stooges to practice at 100 yards. "My men use M4s. When we enter Z-land, 2 will be fitted with the M203 grenade launcher. Their sidearm is the Sig Sauer P226. Each man chooses his own knives. Can you two hit anything with those pea shooters?" A challenge. Bebe knew how to answer that. He stepped up to the firing line, pulled his earplugs out of his pocket, put them in, went through his papa's ritual, and fired 3 shots. Rutherk told one of his doormats to bring him the target. A minute later, the puppet returned and handed the paper to Rutherk. "A 1-inch grouping, Duvalier. You might be more than dunnage on this voyage." "Hayes?" Hayes stepped up with his rifle. He shot 3, and when the target was returned to Rutherk simply nodded. Bebe looked at the target. The grouping was a little tighter than Bebe's. "Show off," he whispered to Ike. Ike grinned. After Bebe, Ike and all of Rutherk's drudges had fired 100 rounds with their rifles. It was time for pistol practice. 25 yards. Rutherk's bootlickers each fired a clip from their SIGs. Then it was time for Rutherk to test Ike and Bebe. "Mind if I borrow one of your SIGs for this one?" Ike asked. "My governor is pretty good for close work, but at this distance I'm sure your pistols are more accurate." "Close work?" Rutherk added. "Well, at 15 yards I can usually empty my revolver in a 2-inch group." "That I'd like to see," Rutherk said. "Show me that and I'll let you try with one of ours." The target was moved to 15 yards, and Ike stepped up to the firing line and emptied his pistol. When the target was brought to Rutherk, he looked at it, walked over to the rack that held the SIGs, and brought one to Ike. "Show me," Rutherk said. Ike checked the gun, stepped up to the line, and fired 5. When the paper target was brought to Rutherk, he looked at it for a short second and let it fall to the ground. 5 miles. When you get back, clean your weapons. Any time you have left before lunch is yours." And he trotted off, his followers following. Ike trotted off behind them. Bebe bent and picked up the target Rutherk had dropped. The grouping was less than 1 inch. Bebe smiled, let the paper fall back to the ground, and ran to catch up with Ike. The afternoon was filled with more of Rutherk testing Ike and Bebe's skills. They must have passed. Rutherk finished in time for them to take a shower before dinner. Dinner was another exercise in excess. After dinner, Rutherk took the 2 former troopers aside in an office-like room in the mansion and examined maps and remarkably well-focused aerial photographs of Peck. The 3 men planned until well after the lights had gone out in the barracks. Eventually, Rutherk stood and stretched. "We leave at 7 tomorrow morning. The kitchen will be open at 6 if you want to eat before we leave. When we get to Peck, until we find and rescue Mr. Donaldson, we'll be eating MREs." Then he held out his hand. Ike stood and shook Rutherk's hand. Bebe stood and did the same. Rutherk nodded and walked into the barracks. Sadie, the goat, Farrell, started her first shift on 119th at midnight that morning. Sally Gooden stayed until 4 a.m., showed her the ropes, and answered questions. When she left, Sally called Sergeant Earhart's office phone and left a message saying that Sadie did just fine. Cedric Jones started his first shift on 119th at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. Trooper Reed stopped by and showed him what he needed to know. When they got to the storage shed, Reed was ready to demonstrate the flamethrower for Cedric and then check him out on what he saw that was not there. Neither were 2 shotguns, and when Reed looked closer at the platform, there seemed to be some sandbags missing, too. Reed would have to write a report and requisition replacements for the missing equipment. Reed left about noon, and Sally Gooden relieved Cedric at 4. Sally called Sergeant Earhart after Cedric left and reported that he had had no problems and no questions. Earhart called Corporal DeBigny into her office for a promotion. At least that's the way Sergeant Earhart presented it to the corporal. While her rank would not change, Julie would have more responsibility. She would continue to train the recruits, but now she would be the person who reviewed the applications and choose the trainees. And so that she would understand the district's platform personnel needs, she would regularly inspect the platforms and meet with Sergeant Earhart for planning and review. "Gee, thanks, buddy, sir," Corporal DeBigny said as she snapped to attention. "Better thee than me, Corporal," Sergeant Earhart replied. Alison Hayes was finally able to tell Dr. McDougall that the cube would be ready tomorrow, Wednesday, and Phase 4 could finally begin.